TV7 Israel News is made possible thanks to your generous donations.
Shalom, Erev Tov, good evening. This is TV7 Israel News, broadcast to you from Jerusalem. The Islamist Hamas terror organization asserts it will not disarm or relinquish control over the Gaza Strip, while repeatedly violating the terms of President Donald Trump's agreement. President Trump insists that while Hamas have been quite rambunctious, as he put it, the ceasefire continues to hold. And in spite of the prevailing ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, which includes large quantities of humanitarian aid flooding into the enclave, the European Commission asserts that the sanctions against Israel remain on the table. The Islamist Hamas persistently violates U.S. President Donald Trump's so-called 20-point peace plan as it determinedly cracks down on all Palestinian opposition within the Gaza Strip. It conducts sporadic attacks against IDF soldiers, and it unequivocally voices intentions to maintain its military and governing capabilities moving forward. Yesterday morning, the Islamist Hamas terror operatives launched a combined attack against IDF troops in two separate locations in the town of Rafah of the southern Gaza Strip, killing 2 soldiers and wounding 2 others.
Today, the IDF announced terrorists fired an anti-tank missile and gunfire towards our troops operating in the area of Rafah to dismantle terrorist infrastructure, all in accordance with the ceasefire agreement. Now, in response, the IDF began striking in the area to eliminate the threat. Just before I came on here, we actually released a statement following Hamas's violation of the ceasefire that the prime minister held a consultation with the defense minister and the heads of the security establishment and instructed them to act forcefully against terrorist targets inside of the Gaza Strip.
It is important to note that a number of incidents were reported also today in which armed operatives of the Islamist Hamas entered into barred areas beyond the so-called yellow line, drawing IDF fire. Moreover, the Islamist Hamas continues to drag its feet with regard to the release of hostages who were murdered in Hamas captivity, which is consequently triggering deliberations in Jerusalem vis-à-vis the imposition of sanctions against the Islamist Hamas, to include a revising of the IDF's lines of deployment in the Gaza Strip.
Hamas is required to uphold its commitments to the mediators, including President Trump, to return our remaining hostages as part of this agreement. The prime minister has made it abundantly clear there will be no compromise and Israel will spare no effort until all of our fallen hostages are home. There are 16 more hostages that need to be returned.
Prime Minister Netanyahu's spokeswoman continued by also emphasizing Israel's uncompromising demand for the Islamist Hamas to demilitarize and that it will not have a role in the future government of the Gaza Strip. The remark came after a senior official of the Islamist Hamas, in an exclusive interview with the London-based Reuters news agency, insisted that the terror organization does not intend to relinquish its governing role over the Gaza Strip. Moreover, according to the Hamas official, if the Palestinian Authority would like to take over the enclave, it should do so through an election after 19 years in which Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas refused to hold any democratic process for fear of losing power.
First, we demand general elections. If the Palestinian Authority wants to rule the Gaza Strip, let it come through the ballot boxes.
In addition to its unambiguous intention to continue governing the Gaza Strip, Hamas does not intend to disarm either.
You agreed to the terms proposed by Trump, including the surrender of weapons. We did not give our approval to the terms in the second phase. We agreed, and in a clear message that we sent, a message in response to Trump, we agreed to a ceasefire and we agreed to the release of all prisoners held by the resistance, whether alive or dead, and of course, An agreement was also reached on the entry of aid into the Gaza Strip, in addition to the formation of a committee or body of technocrats to manage Gaza during the transitional period. This, incidentally, was included in our written response, which U.S. President Trump posted on his personal account online. As for the other matters, we clearly indicated that, for other issues, these require a Palestinian national position.
Its refusal to disarm or to relinquish its governing control over the Gaza Strip evidently stems from the Hamas leadership belief that it had managed to trick the United States into granting them 3 to 5 years of quiet that will undoubtedly provide them the necessary time to rebuild the devastated military infrastructure of Hamas since the atrocities that the terrorist organization had perpetrated during October 7th of 2023.
طرحنا في بعض اللقاءات مع الأمريكيين.
We suggested in some meetings with the Americans that we were prepared for a long-term truce that would be agreed upon, but we did not delve into this topic for one reason. The American, Arab, Islamic, and everyone else's focus was on stopping the war first, and then we could talk about periods of truce or ceasefire.
How long a ceasefire does Hamas want?
At least Hamas is prepared for a truce of 3 to 5 years.
It is important to know that in spite of Hamas's repeated violations and voiced intentions to disregard Phase 2 of the plan, President Donald Trump remains determined to ensure that the ceasefire holds.
We want to make sure that it's going to be very peaceful with Hamas, and as you know, they've been quite rambunctious. They've been doing some shooting, and we think maybe the leadership isn't involved in that. You know, some rebels within, but either way, it's going to be handled properly. It's going to be handled toughly, but properly.
Is the ceasefire still in place?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is.
Meanwhile, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance is expected to travel to Israel later this week for the first time since assuming office in an attempt to keep the ceasefire's momentum going. Nevertheless, Vice President J.D. Vance is clear-eyed about prospects for success.
Well, look, it's going to be complicated. I mean, the best case scenario, meaning if this thing absolutely produces that sustainable long-term peace that the president and I hope that it will, there are going to be fits and starts. There are going to be, Hamas is going to fire on Israel. Israel's going to have to respond, of course. There are going to be moments where you have people within Gaza where you're not quite sure what they're actually doing. So we think that it has the best chance for a sustainable peace. But even if it does that, it's going to have hills and valleys, and we're going to have to monitor the situation.
In response to a question about Hamas's repeated violations of President Trump's 20-point plan, the American vice president stressed that until an actual mechanism is implemented in the field, the terror group's violations will continue to fester.
When we talk about Hamas, you're talking about 40 different cells. It's disjointed. Some of those cells will probably honor the ceasefire. Many of those cells, as we saw some evidence of today, will not. Before we actually can ensure that Hamas is properly disarmed, that's going to require, as we know, some of these Gulf Arab states to get forces in there to actually apply some law and order and some security keeping on the ground. So I think it would be kind of absurd for the president to say, well, Hamas is going to be disarmed 3 or 4 days from now. We don't even have the security infrastructure in place, meaning the Gulf Arab states, our allies, don't have the security infrastructure in place yet to confirm that Hamas is disarmed until you actually go a little bit down the path of this peace mission, of this 20-point peace plan. We're not going to be able to say with confidence that everybody is doing everything that we want them to do.
Turning to the European Union, where EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas, following an EU Foreign Affairs Council meeting, claimed that while the context had changed since President Donald Trump achieved a ceasefire for the Gaza Strip, the EU Commission's threat of sanctions against Israel remains on the table.
Ministers also addressed the European Commission's measures regarding Israel. The ceasefire has changed the context, that is very clear for everybody. However, unless we see real and sustained change on the ground, including more aid reaching Gaza, the threat of sanctions remains on the table.
It is important to highlight that the EU Commission, which is not an elected body, has been pushing for sanctions against Israel over the Hamas-instigated war, despite failure to gain a necessary consensus among the European Union's 27 member states. Thank you for watching TV7 Israel News. If you're blessed by our updates, which are exclusively donation-based, please support TV7 Israel with a donation. You can do so via our website at www.tv7israelnews.com. I would like to also encourage you to keep praying for the families of the hostages who have yet to return from the Gaza Strip, namely those who were murdered in Hamas captivity. Pray also for Christians and Druze currently besieged by the Damascus regime in southern Syria, and for the Christian communities in both Nigeria and China as well. And last but certainly not least, pray for the peace of Jerusalem and the salvation of Israel. Jonathan Essen wishing you a Shavua Mevorach, and God willing, until our next update, Shalom from Jerusalem.